We're going to start on a dark note. I realize that, but hopefully we'll have some uplifting thoughts along the way. We're actually going to start personal this morning because we all three of us come to this with a very personal bent, and I'm going to start with mine. My nephew's best friend was killed at Virginia Tech. My older son was at Fort Hood when that shooting occurred, distant. But the worst one for me was at UC Santa Barbara in May, a couple years ago, in which a shooter came up. He hated women. He hated sorority girls in particular. And he decided to target my son's girlfriend's sorority. He came in, he knocked on the door, and for some reason, one of the girls just decided not to open the door, even though he looked like a normal college kid. He could have gone in there and shot up every girl standing in that hall, every young woman standing in that hall. Thank God she didn't open the door. But he decided to let loose on the students, young students, on the lawn of that sorority, one of whom was killed, one of whom was injured. 6 students were killed during that rampage. That could have been my son standing on that lawn. He happened to be a block away at the time. And since then, I've been, and some of my views will come out during this discussion, it's been something that you realize how much it touches you, all of us, so personally. It's gotten so bad that if I have those 3 incidents in my life, I think it's just indicative of the scope of what we're facing today. I want to turn first to Debbie because you have your own personal experience on the gun front. Share that.
So I'm very complicated on guns. In the interest of full and public disclosure, which Robert Draper reminded the world last week in the New York Times, the man that I'm married to was on the board of the National Rifle Association.
Remind everyone who you're married to.
I'm married to John DIngell.
Former Congressman.
Who was in the Congress for a very long time, but was very active in the NRA and, quite frankly, one of the founders of the lobbying arm. And it is the one subject that he and I use the word violently disagree, but it's not even a good word right now. But and he is a very responsible gun owner. He grew up outdoors, hunting and fishing, and we could talk about that forever. But I grew up in a home. I gave a speech last year on the House floor, not planning on it. It was really just from my heart. I had spoken a little about it before, but not in detail because my mother is still alive. And I come from a generation that what happened in the home stayed in the home. And I had a father that was very volatile, was on opioid drugs before anybody understood what that was, and could snap like that. And I knew what it was like to be in a house where guns were accessible, and he might try to use that gun, and did. And tried to grab that gun from him, my mother running out of the house, us hiding in the closet. This unfortunately happened more than once, and praying to God that we'd be okay. The police wouldn't come. I called the police that night, and we were the house on the hill. Nobody believed these kinds of things in those days. I have spent my entire adult career trying to figure out how do we keep guns out of the hands of those that shouldn't have guns? How do we deal with those that have mental illness? And I think while we're all worried about mass shootings, more than 60% of the suicides in this country are done by guns. 90 people are dying a day. So while what happened in Las Vegas horrifies us and captures us, as do all of these others, we've got a problem that's happening every day. And there are 2 sides to it, and it's very complicated. And because it's complicated, we never get an answer. Yeah. Nobody will go to the table and have the discussion we need to have.
And Caroyln, you're trying to initiate the discussion, and you come to it as a mom and an executive. Go ahead.
So I'm here as a mom first and foremost, but also as from a female and women perspective. When Sandy Hook happened in 2012, my twin daughters were 9 years old. They're now 14. A high school student I went to school with was killed in Las Vegas last Sunday. But I don't have necessarily the personal experience, and yet I'm reminded by Kristen Lemkow, who really was the genesis of me getting involved in this a couple of years ago, by a mother when Kristen approached her after Sandy Hook, and Kristen said what probably all of us would say, "I can't imagine what you're going through." And the mother looked at Kristen and said, "I need you to imagine what we're all going through. I need you to imagine if your child was in that school, because we need to get to a sensible place in this country where both sides can agree on what, frankly, the majority of the population agrees on." And so after what happened in Las Vegas, Kristen and I and several other women jumped in together, along with a few of our male colleagues in the industry, and said, what can we do between a marketing and business and advertising to change what culture believes in this issue? We've done it with LGBT, we've done it with gay marriage, we're working on it with bullying. How can we change the dialogue and get both sides, which are very entrenched in their positions, to at least agree on things that the majority of Americans agree on? And we're pushing forth what we think are two reasonable positions. One is to just reduce and get rid of all the loopholes with universal background checks. Because today, even though there are background checks that are federally mandated if you buy a gun in a federal store, even like a Walmart, the truth of the matter is 40% of gun sales are done privately at gun shows or online. And we want all universal background checks to be conducted. Seems simple, but it's not what's taking place in the majority of states. And the second thing, for gun owners that do legally own guns, we're asking that they be kept safe in the home. Today, there are 1.7 million guns estimated in the home that are kept in a not safe environment. Meaning, at the end of today, when we all go home, there will have been 13 veterans that have taken their life in their home through guns. There will be 7 children that have died through guns. And our population in America, we're 4.2% of the global population, and we own 42% of the guns worldwide. We have a major problem on our hands, and this is a female issue for domestic abuse. A woman in a home with a man that has a gun is 5 times more likely to be shot. There will be women that will be killed today for domestic abuse. It's a veteran issue. It's a parent issue. And at the end of the day, I'm here not as an executive of a company. I'm here as a human and a person who cares about this issue, because at the end of the day, no one is going to care about how much revenue I ran at Facebook. But I hope that somebody will care about the legacy that I and others in this room, and certainly with Congresswoman Debbie, that we actually make a difference once and for all and put some sensible gun laws in effect. And so that's why I'm here
And
today.
you have a petition online to
I have a petition with Kristen Lemkow and Linda Boff and Lisa Licht and a number of women that have been very, very supportive, and we'll put it onto the app, and we could use all of your help. It's not about the number of signatures. I was very focused on that, but we could have millions of signatures, and yet we are still at a place where both sides can't agree, because this is for the people that are staunch Second Amendment believers, they believe guns are a set of freedom. It's almost a God-given right. And I don't think we're going to be changing anytime soon the opinions on the Second Amendment. And yet, if you go on the other side, any measure to try to prevent gun ownership is being shot down. So what can we do? We think we can get to some sensible laws that can protect humans. It may not prevent what happened in Las Vegas. I'm not here to tell you that our universal background checks or keeping a gun home is safe in the home, it would have prevented what happened. But if we can do something to prevent the 33,000 people that are dying every year because of guns, then I think that is an obligation we all have something to do
So
on.
let's talk about the politics of this. Debbie, put on your politician's hat, your member of Congress hat. Sandy Hook, I was on air that weekend, and we were all convinced that this was a game changer, that we were going to see major legislation come out of this. And we did. It didn't come out, but we had a bipartisan compromise to expand background checks, a ban on assault weapons, a ban on high-capacity gun magazines, which I think the latter two are especially also critical, particularly in mass shootings. All of those went down in the Senate. They were unable to get 60 votes needed to pass. What is your sense of the politics in Congress today?
I think it's very hard to get anything through. There's a, well, we probably won't even get the bump legislation, even though even the NRA says we should have the bump legislation, but people have a way with the legislative process of adding other things onto the bump legislation that makes it toxic, which will get it killed in the Senate. There's very common sense legislation that's been introduced by Peter King. There are two bipartisan bills. One is Peter King and Mike Thompson's, which does the background checks. I have the other bipartisan bill with Dan Donovan, which is simple. It's like the bump. If you've been convicted of stalking with a gun, you can't carry a gun. Or if you've been of a dating partner, or if you've...
How about if you're a terrorist?
Well, I mean, we can't get them to go to the table. You know, you can get into the whole discussion. One of the pieces of legislation we want to say is that if you're on the no-fly list, that you can't have a gun. But the no-fly list has all of its own constitutional problems, so you can't get anybody to the table. We make everything so complicated that we can't do anything simple.
But
and
let me just,
women,
did you hear what we can't even get people on the no-fly list to not legally buy guns. It is literally harder to buy over-the-counter cold medication than it is to buy a gun. It's absolutely insane.
And I mean, that is one of the problems. That's why we need women. We need women to become organized and to help. It's going to happen at the grassroots level. You know, I remembered when the assault weapons ban bill passed, and I probably was very critical in what happened because the White House didn't know what was happening, and I called them and said, "You've got a problem," and I'll never forget that night. I thought John DIngell and Chuck Schumer were like having this huge fight about magazines, and I was thinking Fortune Time magazine. I didn't know what they were talking about, and said, "Why are they fighting about magazines?" But I also think we lost the Congress because of the bill that passed that day. John DIngell resigned from the NRA. He voted for the assault weapons ban, not happily, and I'm very proud of that. I'll take credit for that. NRA hates me to this day, and I wear that too. When we went home after that vote, John had death threats. We had protesters. We had to have police protection for 6 months because he voted for that assault weapons ban. Now, I was worried about what was going to happen to me. I had not intended to I was sitting on the floor when we had the sit-in. I had not intended to speak, and I have no idea. When I went, I simply spoke from my heart, and I was scared to go home. I didn't know. I have a very complicated district. I love my district, but it's got some very, very strong second amenders. And when I went home to the same places I'd gone with him in 1995, John DIngell's son, who was also an avid hunter, would not speak to his father for 6 months after that 1995 vote. That's how strong the feelings are out there. And I had women come up to me at the Trenton Street Festival and thank me for my courage. People need to know you care. We need to be a voice that counters the other side. The other side's strong.
You have 30 seconds to one last thought.
The biggest myth that needs to be busted is for people thinking that having a gun in the home makes you safer. For every one gun that is used to protect someone in their home, 34 innocent people are killed in a day, 78 people will commit suicide, and 2 children will have an accidental death. So even if you believe in owning a gun, I will respect that, and I'm not going to get into a debate about the Second Amendment. But please, if you're a mother or if you know people in your neighborhood that have guns, ask the question, is the gun locked up? Do not send your children to homes where guns are not locked up. You do not want to be in a statistic in this. And we need everyone to stop the myths that have been put out there by propaganda and marketing. And we need to, as an industry, and women in particular, take this on. And this should be the legacy that we leave a country that's safer for the children that are coming up.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
All right.